Start off with a quick introduction to what Checkmate is. We'll talk about setting up a Checkmate test, what that looks like, setting up a profile. We'll jump into our first demonstration, and then we'll slowly ramp up to a little bit more complex topic of authoring a custom Checkmate and editing existing Checkmates. So that'll be demonstration number 2. And then lastly, we'll close with some key takeaways and some next steps with a conclusion. So let's talk about what Checkmate is. If you're new to this or new to the concept, Checkmate is basically a collection of checks or tests to ensure quality. So making sure that your parts, assemblies, and drawings meet your company standards, your design standards, and use best practices. So you can execute Checkmate in 3 different environments: in NX, which is what 99% of people are used to, outside of NX, so through your command prompts, you can run it that way as well, or web-based dashboards. So because 99% of the folks use it within NX, that's what we'll concentrate this demonstration on. Okay, so let's talk about some just quick definitions so we're all aligned on some of the terms I'll be using. So a checker is basically a test that checks your model or drawing for specific criteria. So a checker or a test is used synonymously. Then we have a profile, which is a collection of tests or checkers. Then we have a category, which is your category that lists out multiple checks or profiles. And then lastly, we have a DFA or DFA file. This is the format in which checks and profiles will be saved to. So this is an ASCII file containing a Knowledge Fusion source code that's used to create the checkers. So Knowledge Fusion is a source code, but you can pretty much use any programming language as well. So we'll talk about that for the second half of the presentation. Okay, so we talked about the what. What is Checkmate? Now let's talk about when you would use Checkmate, right? So this here is a standard program schedule where you have a development cycle, a production cycle, and most of the time these are overlapped, but for the sake of this demonstration, it's a linear diagram here. So typically you have a concept phase at the beginning and then a release right before you get to production, right? You're releasing drawings, you're releasing models, and there's a check process here, right? So when we talk about Checkmate, it's really a digital checklist to ensure CAD quality, design requirements, right? So you would want to use Checkmate early to make sure you're in the correct path. You're not causing issues with your part files being easily revised, right? You want a stable CAD and file to go ahead and carry on those changes. So we think of using Checkmate early in the design cycle, and then of course right before we get released. So different ways you can deploy Checkmate. Once you have it in NX, it's pretty easy to just hit a button, make sure everything looks good, all your sketches are fully defined, your models are being worked correctly. Okay, so that's the when. Now let's talk about the how. So how do you set up Checkmate? So there's 2 different ways to do this. You can do it through the HD 3D tools. So here in your resource bar on the left, you have this HD 3D tools, which is indicated by the I symbol. So you'll find the Checkmate application there. This will lead to the middle window in which you'll have your results tab, your controls, and then your settings. So if we expand the settings portion there, we'll see the setup test command, and we'll talk about what the options are for that. So that's method number 1. Method number 2 is through the menu, and you'll have access to this menu, this toolbar here, if you have the advanced role set. So if you're not seeing the menu bar here, Check your roles, make sure you have advanced turned on, and you have a lot more tools at your disposal. So here, if we go to menu, analysis, checkmate, we'll see the same setup test command, as well as a couple other checkmate commands. Okay, so that will lead us into the setup test dialog box. And in this dialog box, we have three tabs. So first tab is defining which parts you want to check. So you can check based on the current working part. You can check a specific folder of parts, an assembly, all loaded parts to really define what that test will be. Second tab is the test itself. So here, this is where you'll down select your specific category, your profiles, your tests, and you'll move those down below. And then tab number 3 is your options. So this is your conditions to stop. If you have a warning, do you want to stop? If you have an error, do you want to stop? Right, this can be a more efficient way if you're, say, checking hundreds of parts. Right, you'll want to control those run options. Then you have your log files, how you view your results, where your results will be saved, etc. Okay. So this is the first demonstration will cover, is setting up a test, going through that motion there. Okay, the next thing we'll talk about here, just briefly, is deploying Checkmate tests. So once you've down selected some of the tests you would like to use, not only for this first time, but maybe have a standard profile for your team, you want to make sure everyone's using the same tests, right? The same standard across the board. So typically you would have your saved tests and profiles in a folder, a directory, and everyone points to that directory. So in this example, we'll be using the defaults at the user level, but you can go ahead and set this up at the site level for everyone to use, or at the group level if it's specific to manufacturing, if it's specific to your design group, subsystem, etc. Right? You can set up groups for those. Okay. So now let's jump into the first demonstration. We'll walk through the setup process. Okay, so here I have NX opened. I'm using NX 2212, so this is one of the newer versions, but pretty much any of the newer versions, you'll have the same similar interface. Okay. So right now I have a pump assembly model, and the objective here is, say, maybe I've gotten closer to that detailed design phase, and I want to verify my parts before I send them to get released, and before I move on to drawings. Okay. So I will go ahead and first open up a single part here. This is the Conrod part, and I want to go ahead and launch Checkmate. So I'll go to my HD 3D tools. Under my settings section, I'll go to setup tests. And here, this will launch that window that we saw, right? So first step is setting up or defining which parts we want that test to run on. So this is the current part. This is verifying the parts to test. Okay. Now I can move into the test tab here. Right, so here are my categories, and I have a profile already created, but I can go ahead and select some of the out-of-the-box options. Maybe we go to modeling. I have sketch fully defined here already. I can check my features, see if there's something referencing the chamfer. I can check if I have if my features are up to date. So pretty much any of these tests, I can go ahead and manually enter those here. So the first time you do this, you'll want to get familiar with what tests are available out of the box that you are interested in. So you build your profile, right? In this case, I just have 3 of them selected, so I'll go ahead and run through that. And that'll be my first Checkmate test. Right? Okay. So if I hit close, you'll see I have my results window. This will tell me what my results are for those given tests I selected. The nice thing about this is I can go ahead and take a look at what specific feature is failing and why is it failing. Right? If I double click on the test itself, I can see the test status, why it failed. This is telling me a sketch is partially defined. And this is telling me what specific sketch feature is failing. Okay. Same thing with the edge blend, right? This is telling me an edge blend is being referenced on a future feature. So here, this can be a potential issue down the line. So this just gives me awareness to go ahead, go back into the model tree and correct these errors. Right? So just imagine trying to check all the sketches manually here. It would take a while. Right, so now I performed a quick Checkmate test. I can go into my sketch feature and define my the rest of my dimensions. So here, I believe I'm missing just an angular dimension, so I can go ahead and change or define that. And we'll just say this is 94.5, 94.3. Let's just keep it the same so nothing breaks. Let's see. Let's see if I move this out. It looks like it needs this to be defined. So 0.35. Perfect. And this here is telling me my sketch is fully defined. Okay, so now if I go back here, I can go ahead and execute this same test. Right, so now this verifies that my sketches are all fully defined. Okay. So I mentioned earlier that I have a profile already created. Right, so once you take a look at all the out-of-the-box tests, you want to create a profile so you're not manually digging in here for all these tests, right? So what I've done is I've created a category called Saratech Demo, and I have profiles for the model, the modeling environment, drafting environment, and the assemblies environment. So here I can go into my model profile. I can double click on this and select Show Checkers. And this will show me all the checkers in this profile I created. So here, this is checking that my weight data is up to date. This is checking just number of features as a report, out-of-date features. If there's a chamfer early up in the model tree, or if there's an edge blend early up in the model tree, sketches fully defined, etc. So these are some key things you want to look at and collect internally. Create your profile. So that's what this is doing. And so here, instead of clicking 20 times, I just click on Saratech Demo. Maybe you can call it your release profile before you release your parts. Then hit execute, and you have those results, right? So this gives me a lot more information about my part. So what I like to do is filter or sort based on failed. So I go ahead and first do that. So I can resolve that weight data is up to date, go to my properties, have that checked. I can evaluate which features are buried. Take a look at this trim body feature number 11, resolve that, kind of walk down the line, right, as I'm correcting those. And then I want to pay attention to this information window here. So this is giving you information. It's not going to tell you whether it passed or not necessarily. You have to dig in here and understand what's going on. So the best thing to do for these information objects is to double click, open up the result, and read the test result message. So this here is telling me that the world coordinate system is the absolute coordinate system. So that's correct. That's what I'm looking for. And then I can hit this arrow to expedite this process and just go down the line. So number of features, this is telling me there's 34 features, so nothing out of the ordinary. Report out of date features, no out of date features in this case, right? And you just go down the line and take a look at those as well. Okay, so that's a quick tip just to make your life easier when you're getting these informations in your results. Okay. Now let's take a look at the assembly environment. So nice thing about the assembly environment in Checkmate is you can verify, you can run that same model profile in your assembly, and you can say my current part and all levels. So this is all the subcomponents of my assembly here. Right? If you just have your assembly loaded, you can just select this all loaded parts, and that will give you everything in that assembly, right? But if you have multiple assemblies open, if you have a higher level assembly open, then you may want to go to current part and then all levels in that part, right? So I can do that same thing, expedite my process, execute the test. And here I have, I don't know, 12 to 20 parts. So that was just a couple of seconds to check all those parts. So again, you can imagine trying to do this manually, it'll take a very long process as opposed to getting the results fairly quickly here. What I like to do is, again, filter based on all your failed features, and you can also kind of go down the line here, right? For a specific part, you can see which tests failed, and resolve those one by one. Another tip for using the assembly feature in Checkmate is you have an option to have your Checkmate results in your column. So here I can see which parts failed my profile, and I can go one by one and resolve those. So in order to toggle this on, you'll right click the header, select columns, then select Checkmate result. Okay, so now let's talk about creating your own profile, right? So we talked about how we want to expedite the check selection process. So in order to do that, you'll have to go to this menu, analysis, Checkmate, and author test command. Here you'll see that create edit profile and some authoring checkers. Okay. So in this case, the way I created that Saratech demo profile was I came in here, I created my test category. I will call this CES test, display name. This I will just call this test and test. Right. Then from here, you will down select which checks you would like to create or add to that profile. So we'll just add some quick features here, maybe an examine geometry, right? Check tolerances, features, feature rollback, right? Just select all the ones relevant to your needs and standards. And once you get to this point, you have everything selected. You can save this as a profile. I will call this just test. You'll see here, this is saving it as a DFA file. And now I have this saved. So I can hit cancel. And I may have to restart NX in order to see it. Let's take a look if it's able to bring this up. Okay, so under categories, I'll see CDS test and I see test in here, right? So if I now move this down here, I have test, and if I right click the test checker, I can see those tests I added to this profile, right? So again, that's kind of the next step once you've standardized that process. And in order for your profile to show up in this dialog box, like I mentioned previously, that is done through your customer default settings. In your analysis section, Checkmate, this is pointing to my Checkmate files directory. So that's where everything's being saved to. Okay? So again, once you have those standards in place, you'll have all your team members point to a centralized location and manage your Checkmate profiles from there. Okay. Okay, so now let me jump back onto the presentation and talk about authoring Checkmate tests. So this will kind of ramp up a little bit. Okay, so let's talk about authoring Checkmate tests. So in order to access that, you'll have to go through your menu, analysis, Checkmate, author tests. And that will present you this dialog box, and you can write and author Checkmate tests based on NX's Knowledge Fusion technology or the NX Open Programming Language, which is basically open to anything. It's open to C++, C#, Python, Visual Basic, or Java. And NX provides some out-of-the-box checkers and functions in your UG-based directory. So this is depending on which NX version you're using, design tools, Checkmate, and your DFA folder. Okay. And here, authoring Checkmate tests, you're able to create and edit and configure checkers, create or edit functions, create or edit profiles, which is what we just saw. So creating and editing checkers moves one step above that. That requires some programming knowledge and knowledge into the NX functions and attributes. So we won't cover all the nuances here. It's outside of this the scope of this presentation, but we will cover an example, a simple example of what that looks like. Okay. So if you're interested in creating your own custom checks, you'll move into this Create Editor Checker tab at the top. And the very first section here is defining your names, right? This is what we saw in that profile. We define our category, display name, class name. And so pretty much defining where that's located. Then you have your mixins. This is your mixin classes. Think of it as your libraries of what functions you'll use, attributes, things like that. So you'll also define which mixins you'll add, and all checkers require the UG base checker mixin. So you'll start off with that and add on to it as required. Then you have your quick reference button here, which is handy. this, if you expand the classes and functions folder right below that, you'll see all the different functions and some good documentation on what those do, the parameters, and some good instructions to get started. Okay. Then you have your documentation text. This is documentation describing what your test is, instructions, parameters, so things for a user to take a look at and understand what the check itself entails. Then you have attributes or parameters of what that check will require. So these can be calls for specific features, labels, logs, etc. And then you have your checker function, right? So if this example here looks at the sketch fully defined function. So this will basically say, take a look at your attributes for that sketch, and if your sketch is partially defined, then it's a failed criteria, and it basically has a loop to go through all the sketching features, take a look at those statuses, right? So this moves on to more advanced kind of customization and creation of your functions. So what we'll look at now is a quick demonstration of how to create a custom and author a test, starting with a template. So that's always recommended. If you can start with an existing check or a template, you can go ahead and modify that to fit your needs. Okay, so for this example, we'll open up a drawing. So here I have a drawing, and I have now set up a test for this. So the first thing I'll look at is this template category. This is your starting point. This is some out-of-the-box templates that you can modify to fit your needs. And so what we'll look at is the template and drafting section, and we will check dimension tolerances. So that's our first step here. So if I go ahead and click on that, I can execute this for my specific part. For example here, let's say just this first one, right? And because it's a template, it's just going to give me a warning, right? So I have to go ahead and edit this. So if I double click on here, this is telling me no values are given to the parameters. So this check is checking for dimension tolerances on the drawing. So for example, if you're working with sheet metal or a specific manufacturing process that has a minimum tolerance, you'd want to catch that before it gets released, whether it's a typo or someone wants to add a tighter tolerance that may not be required, right? You want to take a look at that and catch that before it gets released or into production. And so what we can do is modify this test here to fit our specific tolerances. And so what I'll do is I'll go back into the author test command, go to my create edit checker, and I will start off with that template, right? So I'll click on this folder. I'll expand template, drafting, and check dimension tolerances. And I'll click OK. Okay. So now this is telling me what my class name, what my display name is, my test category. So here, first thing I'll do is change this test category, move it out of the template folder into the, let's call this the Saratech demo folder. And I will call that drafting. Then from here, I will go ahead and create, well, I'll take a look at the documentation first. Right, so this is the documentation for this test, and every template will have a description of what the test entails, and it will have instructions to customize this template. So here we can see that it requires name changes, some optional changes here. Your display name is optional to change, and then your parameters. So here I want to go ahead and define my parameters based on my company standards. Right, so here I want my minimum tolerances, maximum, min-max for angular tolerances, and a negative value here implies the tolerance is not to be checked. So here are my instructions to modify this test here. So here are my parameters or my attributes. So in order to define a min tolerance now, I'll select this attribute, hit edit, and define a minimum for this. So let's say the minimum is 0.4. Let's just say minimum 4 thou here. Maximum, we'll add a maximum of 0.5 just to kind of throw something on there. Angular, let's say anything lower than 0.01 or 0.1, right? Max 5. I have my parameters, and of course you can add a negative on there, so it skips over that criteria. And now I have my attributes. I'll leave my function alone. I'll save this. Instead of saving it here, I will save it back to my custom Checkmate files. Okay. And now if I go into my my setup, I should see that on there now. Saratech demo. Let's see. CES test. Checkmate files. QC. That should be in here. I may have to restart. Let's see. Update drawing. Tolerances. Let's see. Hopefully I don't have to restart my session. Let's see. Drafting. Let's check. I think I added it into this profile. So let's go ahead and check that. So here I have, let's see, drawings, master, drafting preferences. Okay, so let's see if I can rewrite this here. Profile, parameters, tolerance. Yeah, I'll have to change it. I think so I have this opened. So the test was saved into this Checkmate files. And if we take a look at the DFA file, we'll see that this Saratech demo, that test category, was looking at drafting. So let's just put tolerances on here. It's not recommended to write here, so this may not work. But for the sake of time, we'll try this out. Okay. So we have our test category, display name. All right, let's save this. And let's go ahead and rerun this. Saratech demo. Okay, so it looks like I'll have to kind of put this back together. So let me do that real quick. But the idea is pretty much, I overwrote that profile, so I have to change my names. I have to be careful with my names there, and then rerun that. Let's just do that because this is a good example. Okay. So I'll go back to template, drafting, check dimension tolerances. I want my min again to be 0.0. Let's do 6 thou. Max, let's say 0.25. Min angle 1. Max angle, let's go 5. Okay. Now let's rename these. So this here will become test category. Let's call this test. We'll just call this test. Display name, we'll keep this the same. Class name, let's use the same thing here. Now let's go ahead and save this. We're not overwriting that drafting profile I had. Okay. Syntax error. Okay. So that may have an issue with this class name. Let's go ahead and click cancel. Let's go back to our setup. And let's see if we have that here now, test. Type demo, CS test. Let's see. Yeah, that's not on here. Tolerances, DFA. Okay, there's a syntax error. So this should be, I believe there's no spaces required for the class name. So here, this class name requires, let's see, test category, test displayed name. And so all that should be good. All this should be good. Okay, so there is a little bit of troubleshooting to occur. But what we can do here, just for the sake of time, what I can do as well is, because this is configured to have manual input as well, for the template itself, I can go into that drafting environment, go in here, and if you have this option enabled in your authoring settings, you allow the users to customize this test profile. Right, so here I can also enter my min and max values as well. But I was trying to do it creating my own custom. Here I'm configuring this template. But again, for the sake of time, I'm going to I'm just going to configure it here, just so I can get some results. Right. Okay, so now I went ahead, I configured it from here, I executed that checkmate test, and now I have, instead of a warning, I have failed results because of my parameters. Right. So now here I can see my linear dimension has a tolerance that is below that criteria. So again, depending on what standards you have, you may want to grab a template. Be careful with the syntax errors and rewriting the existing profile. So in order to correct that, you would have to create your own um, a separate folder, a separate file name for that, and standardize that. But you'll still get results here if you configure it manually, and you can still customize some of those tests from the templates. Okay, so let's jump back to the slides and let's close this out here. So a quick summary, you saw how Checkmate enables you to efficiently, effectively follow company design standards, CAD standards, best practices, and reduce and discover errors early in your development cycle. Right? So instead of manually trying to verify your CAD models, you're doing it early, often, and efficiently. Okay. So let's talk about some next steps here. So first step is to understand and align what your standards should be, right? As a company, you want an internal CAD standards document that everyone follows, everyone agrees to. You then want to test and use some out-of-the-box checks, see what's available, see what fits your internal standards. You'll want to create profiles from those out-of-the-box checks. You'll then deploy those to the rest of your team, have a centralized location for everyone to point to and grab those checks. And then you want to go ahead and look at creating custom checks as required. So this does require an author license to create those checks. And it's a lot more involved, right? You saw those functions, you saw those attributes, being familiar with the libraries, the mixins, knowledge fusion, or a programming language. So there is a lot more effort required, even syntaxes, right, we saw. So before we jump into that phase, we really want to understand what the needs are. And then if it's required, if you're performing hundreds, thousands of checks, for a life cycle or multiple products, then it's beneficial to take a look at those custom checks. And then lastly, you want to go ahead and maintain your standards and checks as required. So you'll constantly want to revise your internal standards as things come up, as revisions, as newer versions are installed. Right? You'll want to take a look at those, and then you'll want to adapt to expedite the checking process. And then lastly here, if you would like the profiles demonstrated, so the model, the drafting, assemblies, and the corrected version of the tolerances check, go ahead and contact us. Or if you would like a discovery call to evaluate Checkmate, how you can use those to meet your specific needs. If you have any specific questions of creating custom checks, things like that, you can go ahead and schedule a discovery call to take a look at those a little bit more detail.
So first we're going to go ahead and cover some of the questions we have. We do have a question. How do you export the results?
Yeah. So to export those results, when you're setting up your tests, you'll go into your run options. This here, you can generate your log file, and this will also export your results. And you can have a result per part or per session. So if you're running on multiple parts, you can go ahead and export everything in one file, and you can select which directory to export to, and this will create an XML file for you to capture your results, and again, have that be in addition to your release process.
Perfect, thank you. Let me see. Is it possible to create a custom icon in NX to run the custom check directly from the ribbon?
Yeah, absolutely. So the simplest way to do that is, going into your customization options. So let me go back to my part. So instead of going through all the different clicks here, you can definitely look into customizing your ribbon. Maybe there's a button here that you'd like to add. So here I can look for Checkmate. It should be available. So we have view Checkmate results, set up tests. Right, I can go ahead and look for that, throw that on here, and have this button be available. Um, Now, if you want to get into a little bit more um, uh, advanced customization, right, you can ask manually create a button that goes into the actual test itself, and that will require a little bit more effort to just to kind of call that command, call this specific test. But just for a quick button on your ribbon here, you can add this, and that'll get you, you know, to your setup test environment.
Thank you. And we do have one more. Is there a way to combine checks using Boolean function? Example, I want tolerance to be checked for certain range only when my material is a sheet metal.
Yep, absolutely. So you can definitely do that. You will have to go into your, let me show this. You would have to go into your edit environment, right? You would want to bring in your attributes, for example, your tolerance attributes, your material attributes, and then in your function, you would have to say, if material is X, then perform these set of rules. If else, etc. So you can definitely add that in there. It is more involved, more effort. You would have to go into the commands for first check, commands for the second check, and make sure your code is able to combine and read properly. So, but yeah, definitely you can add that in there. It's capable of doing that.
Thanks for checking out our channel. If you like what you saw, make sure to like and subscribe down below so you don't miss out on any new videos.